Thanks all for coming to the breakout room. We are just waiting for the actual breakout room hosts. Okay, I'm not sure what is going on with the breakout room hosts, but I am just getting sorted to jump in their place. So if you'll just give me one moment while they are joining, I can do that. Manal, is that you in the host 500 or is that Dennis or Lisa?
Kristen over here. Hi, Ruthie. How are you?
Hi.
No, I just wanted to make sure that the main room is not closed. So it's not. It's still recording though, so you can pause the recording. Let me stop that for you.
Oh, I can see some of the groups coming back. Host colleagues, don't forget to rename yourselves as you come back in.
Barbara, sorry, I'm getting there. I accidentally closed out of them.
No, don't worry at all. Fiona, don't forget to change your name. Rename yourself as you come back in. Oh, my camera's gone horribly blurry. That's a bit better. I've obviously been sitting here too long today, listening to fantastic plenaries. Okay, so I think we've probably got everyone back, or we've got quite a few people back. So what we're going to do now, I'm just checking in, where we go. We're just going to do a little round of reporting back from the plenaries. So I'm first of all just going to ask room 1. I think that's Tristano. We obviously not a whole description of the arguments that you had about what to put in which cell, but was there something that you thought was an interesting reflection coming out of your group?
Well, yes, we discussed a lot, and we didn't complete the exercise. We half did the exercise and half we discussed general questions. I think we show the overarching logic of covering the service and the costing, and we received questions on the ranges. Why there are the ranges, if we are going to calculate them in the final figure. And we basically discussed a little bit on this specific issue of the ranges.
Yeah, no, I think that sort of issue of the ranges and the data uncertainty came up in our group as well, and is part of the problem of trying to generate these really plausible global cost estimates. Just going to group 2, Tabisa or Dennis. Tabisa, I think. Similarly, anything that was kind of a theme of the discussion that you had?
Yes, really, I think one of the things that came out in our group is just checking on the spreadsheet who would be using the spreadsheet when we are taking the spreadsheet out to the people, the audience, who are we aiming to get there, because then we all know that the spreadsheet can be a bit tricky. And then, so we had a discussion there in terms of really who are the people that we think should be appropriate to use the spreadsheet to get valuable information from. And then I think the other one, but we can talk about that also. And the other comment that came from the group is that the data collection, is it for global benchmarking or just for regional or something like that? And our colleague Oliver he indicated that he's got a lot of questions that he would maybe just want to take to the plenary, then because he's got experience also in finances and all those things, so which is quite good. So that's something that we said we can discuss as a group, as a whole, because he's got a wealth of knowledge that would be helpful for everyone. So we held it there, and then we didn't finish the spreadsheet, but we had a good group there.
Excellent, great. Thanks so much, Tabisa. And I'm quaking in my boots now. I know Oliver far too well to think those are going to be easy comments or questions to deal with. Let's just go. I was hoping you would have sorted him out, Tabisa, before he came back to plenary. Let's just go to group 3. Philip.
Thanks, Barbara. Yeah, so unfortunately, group 1, group 2 were filled with slackers. They didn't manage to finish the spreadsheet. We completely finished the spreadsheet. We were really on the ball. So Barbara was part of our group, so she knows that's not the truth. But we did have some really good discussions. People were able to actually do some good calculations. Some of the calculations we were doing. We had, again, as been spoken about before, how do we work out the confidence and so forth. But I think the kind of standout point for me was around the boundary of the data. Where do we put this boundary? Who are we actually collecting the data from? Where does the service start and end? Do we include regulatory costs as an example? So I think that is a useful discussion point for plenary.
Yeah, no, thanks. And I noticed earlier there was a question in plenary from, I think it was from, I can't remember who it was from now, about whether the cost of house improvements was included. So that boundary question, really an interesting one. Thanks, Philip. Fine.
And sorry, just one more point to note was there was a question around, whether the tools are new and available, and can people access the database also. I think that's also something that's quite important to share.
So I'll try and touch on some of those when I'm talking at the end. That's great, thank you. And finally, group 4 must be Fiona's group. I think Fiona and Mofwe.
Yes, Barbara. Right. Well, since we are the last group to report, well, some of the points has been iterated, but we have a pretty useful discussion about which course that is essential to say that a data point is complete. And then we discuss about service coverage as well, why we want to measure the service as the whole coverage, not only the one per year. And then somebody was asking whether we include the taxation.
Yeah,
and which I think I showed how the workbook is composed. And maybe the last question, which is iterated also by other group, is who will benefit from the tools and who will benefit from the data later on. Yeah,
lovely questions. Great. Cool, thanks so much. So I have a little presentation to make. Oh God, I don't know how to get rid of my huge picture of all of you. I love you very much, but I don't want you all over my screen right now. So I'm just going to go to the next slide. I'm going to just talk a little bit about the problem of the workbooks. So the workbooks, they're quite complex and they need quite a lot of data. So in terms of who's likely to do this, certainly at the moment, with the support of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we recognise that to collect this data, it's a lot to ask service providers. So we have this fabulous team, colleagues from Emanti and Citywise, and we have had students from the university as well and other colleagues supporting the collection of this data. And we would imagine that that will continue for some time. We'd like to think that if the database becomes really useful globally, then people might start to support us by providing data more spontaneously. But there's a lot of data requests out there, so we recognise that that might be quite difficult. Having said that, the thing about these complex data collection is that the more useful end of the tool is what this data is then used to do. So if we go to the next slide, Lauren, because we have a standard model for collecting the data and therefore we can sort it using a standard algorithm which is in the database, we can very quickly generate comparative costs for services, for data points which are included in the database. So for example, if you actually completed those worksheets and put them into the database, this is what they tell us. They tell us that Miss Sunshine's manual emptying business has a cost of about $103 per year per household, and that's the total annualized cost. So that's her annualized capex plus her annual operating cost. And you can compare that with the mechanical emptying business of Mrs. Happiness, which has a cost exactly the same cost, so the annualized cost per household of $52. So surprisingly, I mean, I think this is a point that Nicola Green was making yesterday in the pit emptying session. It always surprises people that manual emptying actually turns out to be more expensive very often than mechanical emptying, and that's because the operational costs of manual emptying are very high. The numbers of journeys are higher, the speed of emptying is lower, the labor costs are higher. We couldn't really see that if we weren't able to organize these two data points in a consistent way. So that's one of the things that the data, once it's processed, allows us to do. Next slide, Lauren. But the other thing it allows us to do is, of course, to take these numbers and understand that this is the full cost that would need to be covered from any sources in order for this operation to be financially sustainable. So we're not saying this is what users have to pay or this is what the government has to pay. We're simply saying that from all of the available sources, if you want Mrs. Happiness's mechanical business to be sustainable, for every household, every year, we need $52. And that's kind of one of the things that we were really aiming to achieve with this database. The other thing that we can do, next slide please, is we could have a look at an individual business and benchmark it against other operators providing similar services. So we can see, for example, that Miss Sunshine's manual operating service looks fairly middle of the road from a cost point of view. Mrs. Happiness's business looks slightly at the higher end of the mechanical emptying data points that we have in the database. And it would be interesting to go back and check in the original workbooks to see what might be driving that. We might find that Mrs. Happiness is the only one of these people that's actually running a legal business and paying her taxes, for example. However, we can also, if you just click to the next slide, Lauren, we can also look at some of the regional variations. So, right now in the database, all of the manual emptying cases that are in the database right now, they were when we pulled these data, are from sub-Saharan Africa. We'd have to look more closely into these data points to see what's driving them. But on the mechanical side, one thing we can already start to see in the data is that the mechanical operations tend to be less expensive in South Asia compared to sub-Saharan Africa. And we can, as we're building up the database, we can start to understand that that's driven by relative wage costs, import costs of materials and equipment, for example. So that's kind of what we're trying to achieve. So globally, so the operator might find some useful information. Globally, we might find some useful information. Let's think about the city now. So if we go to the next slide, here's an example with all the data points from, it's actually a pretend city, it's still Cityville, but these are actually real data points from the database. So these are data which has been entered using the workbooks and then processed to generate this total annualized cost per household for some containment, some emptying and transport, and some treatment options. So we can compare the different options and we can see that Miss Sunshine and Mrs. Happiness, or was it Miss Happiness and Mrs. Sunshine, are running kind of middle of the road cost businesses here. But as the city as a whole, if you click to the next one, we might also be able to say, well, what would a total system cost? So in this particular case, we can see that the conventional sewerage with pumping and mechanically aerated treatment in this particular case is costing a total of about $404 per household per year. That's pretty expensive. The kind of benchmark number we expect to see is around $200 normally. The conventional FSM with mechanical emptying and passive anaerobic treatment is much lower in this particular case. I don't want to say that it's lower in any case. I'm just saying that in this particular city's case, their FSM operation, if it was running completely end to end and everybody was connected, is costing considerably less than the conventional sewerage options. And you might be able to add in some other options here. So I'm absolutely not saying that sewerage is more expensive than FSM. I'm saying for this particular case, and these are conventional sewers. So what we're trying to do at the moment is really build up the number of data points in the database so that we can start to make these global estimates more accurate. In the support material for this event, we've put the paper that we published last year, which had all of the data that we had in from about 25 cities from last year. But we could do with a lot more data if we're really going to start to generate sort of globally persuasive benchmark numbers for what these systems cost. So what we're really asking people to do, and that's why we ran this session, is to reach out if you'd like to comment on our beta tools, comment on the way we're analysing the data, but even more, if you'd like to join in with the process of collecting and organising data. We've got support at the moment for the next year with the generous support of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So if anyone is interested, please do let us know. I've got some acknowledgement slides, but I'm going to stop just at that. Well, maybe I'll quickly say acknowledgements. There's lots of people who've been involved in collecting all of this data, and not all of them are here, some of them are, but just some colleagues from the University of Leeds and colleagues at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have been very involved in conceptualizing all of this. And also people that have contributed to the data that we've collected so far. If we just stop sharing for a moment, or at least yeah, I think that's probably best. I'm just going to open it up. We've got about 12-15 minutes. So if there are any questions, please do just jump in and maybe put them in the chat, or put them into the right. I'm just going to look through the chat on the thing. There's a good question from Raymond. I remembered it was Raymond who'd asked the question about whether the cost of improving housing is included. We didn't include it, so that the boundary is up to the operator's cost. The only exception is that we are including the cost of the toilet and the connection, but we're not including anything else. So we're not including any actual structural improvements that need to be made to housing. And then Anthony's asked about CACTUS communicating with other similar tools. So what we're hoping at the moment with CACTUS is that we're trying to generate data that can be used as an input to all the really cool planning tools. I mean, ideally, you'd be able to push data backwards and forwards, and maybe we'll get to that point. At the moment, it's quite complicated already to process this data. So we're processing the data on our database, but I think in the longer term, we'd really like to see these tools being connected together, obviously. Right, Jonathan has a question. Has the tool revealed anything about economies of scale, the most efficient size or scale for service providers? And that is a terrific question. And the answer is no, because we don't have enough data points. We can start to see it a little bit. We can see the economies of scale in sewerage projects already. We're pretty sure we will be able to say something about economies of scale for CBS and for FSM, but we don't have enough data points at the moment. But as Ruthie says in the chat, we've had a really good experience, I think, of lots of people working in this space and really trying to use common sets of definitions. The reason why we created these workbooks was really just to try and help people to give us data or collect data or analyze their data using a standard set of definitions. My opinion is that one of the most useful things coming out of this would be if people would all start to report their data using full, complete, if you like, annualized costs on a per household or per capita basis, because that's a much more meaningful number. Very often when you read descriptions of the relative costs of urban sanitation, we hear people saying, oh, this is more expensive than that, but we're never quite sure if people are talking about the complete cost of the CapEx and the OpEx together, or just CapEx or just OpEx. Other questions? Anthony's keen, fantastic. Great. So we have beta tools, which we can share fairly soon. So in the next couple of months, we're Emanti and Citywise are going out and about with the workbooks as we currently have them to collect data. If anyone's interested in being part of that process, Anthony will just be in touch with you straight afterwards, because that would be very cool. We're also rebuilding our website, so it's much more intuitive to download the workbooks, fill them in and upload them back up to us. At the moment, we are going to keep doing quality control on the data which is entered, obviously, because at the moment we want to see that the data is comparable as it comes onto the system. So that's what we're using the support from the Gates Foundation to do. But we'd really, really like to see more data coming onto the database so it can start to tell us something a bit more useful. I mean, at the moment, we can see, for example, that more expensive systems are more expensive, but, you know, it'd be nice to know what's driving those cost differentials. And as Ruthie said right at the start, our desirable endpoint is to start to build some updated parametric estimations for what urban sanitation should be costing in different types of cities at different scales under different conditions, which would be a very nice thing to be able to do. It's very strange being in these sessions, not being able to quite see everybody, but any other questions in the chat, or if anybody has anything else to ask?
Oliver has his hand raised.
Fantastic. Oliver, do you want to just uncloak and ask a question?
Hi there, Barbara.
You did have questions. Yes, I remember. Yes, hello.
Sorry, and I've lost the page, so I couldn't type them. So yeah, I'm talking to them. But thanks, it's great to see, and it's great to see all the work you're doing. And we all know how difficult this is in terms of gathering cost data and accurate data across lots of different places. So it's great to see this tool, and I'll look at it in more detail. But a couple of quick questions. One of the things that you're obviously doing is you're capturing data at a snapshot at a single time, and if over the years, we'll obviously get a clearer picture of how costs are changing. But are you looking at all at which costs might be more susceptible to inflation and things like that? For example, if you're a fecal sludge truck driver in the UK at the moment, your salary is probably quadrupled in the last month because there's none of them, or there's no chemicals in the UK at the moment, so the cost of those are going up, so no one's being able to treat their waste properly in that way.
There's also no fuel to drive your truck, so the whole business has been a bit of a
Exactly. So we all know that these costs aren't static, and they do change based on various things. So it'd be interesting if that's built into the tool at all. If there's any way we could try and build that in, that would be my first thing.
Yeah.
Second one was, and this is again, I don't know the tool well enough, but was something we've talked about, Barbara, maybe earlier in the week we touched on, is around the sort of the soft infrastructure that supports these systems. So obviously we're talking here about very much direct service delivery and getting services to people, but there are obviously whole loads of costs around the wider soft infrastructure, whether, and this is, I think, comes back to the point about about boundaries you were touching on earlier, about, are we looking at M&E systems? Are we looking about regulation? Are we looking at all those other soft infrastructure costs that actually are needed in place to manage systems and services, not just the sort of day-to-day, let's collect waste and get rid of it across the supply chain? So yeah, just a couple of questions, but great to see all the work you're doing, and nice to see you as well.
Thank you. Likewise, except I can't see you, but it's nice to hear your voice. So cost over time, we will be able to keep an eye on that, because all the data is tagged with its original. We've got to do two quite clever things. One is that we have to normalize all the data to a comparable year, and we can update that all the time. So we're reporting all the data I've just showed you of 2018 international dollars, but of course it could be 2021 international now. But what we can do is look back historically. So hopefully, as we progressively collect data, and we could go back and collect data later on and see what the operations, what the operational costs are looking like. We can also manipulate data points. So you can actually, theoretically, you could take all of the mechanical fecal sludge operators out of the database and say, well, what will happen if the price of fuel doubles in Africa? And then just have a look at what effect that has. And that's quite important as well, because it helps to see which are the most significant cost drivers. So that's quite useful. At the moment, I wouldn't make any claims to being able to do that because we haven't got enough data in the database. It's extraordinary how little data there is. And people quite often said to us, oh, but you know, there is this data. Have you read this? Have you seen this? But actually sets of complete data for operational bits of sanitation systems, it's really quite hard. There isn't a lot. So hopefully we can start to answer those questions a bit more. The soft infrastructure is a really good question. We made a very, very specific decision not to include that. It's super important, and I would love somebody else to be collecting that information. The reason why we didn't is because, well, because I was extremely anxious that we didn't have the simplest information, which is the sort of bog standard, what I would think of as the operational data that you need to know how to run a sanitation business. I think and we have included within that all the soft services that an operator might use. So for example, anybody that's running a trucking service who also runs a call center or some sort of, you know, marketing costs, they're all included. So any costs which are internal to the operator are included, but the external governance costs, the enabling environment costs, are not included, and that would be something really important to bring to the attention of policymakers. It's like you not only need to have this much money to cover the service that you're delivering, but also these are the management costs. But it's a really good question, and I would really like, I mean, if I felt like if our data was a bit richer, then we could bring it to that bigger conversation. At the moment, we keep going to those conversations with very patchy service technical data, if you like, sort of service delivery data, but it's a really important point. Anthony's just asked about the intersection with IBNet, which is very useful, very important and very useful, because that's a conversation we are starting to have now with IWA. I would love to think that the long-term destination of this database and this information would be within IBNet. That seems like a logical home for it, but I'm not sure if that's what will happen. That seems like quite a good destination for this kind of work. Laura's sort of pointing out that these regulatory costs above and beyond the service might be different for the different systems. That's a very good point. I think it's also very important to remember that while we are modelling the costs of safely managed sanitation systems, so we're trying to take bits of systems which are actually working and add them up to make whole sanitation service chains, sort of theoretical complete systems, which very often don't exist, but you can kind of construct them. It is important to remember that even then, if you have a combined sewerage system, it's providing a very different service from some fecal sludge management based systems. So, you know, your combined sewerage system might be carrying all of your household grey water and some of your stormwater. So one of the things we're saying is that there's a bunch of exogenous factors that city officials, when they make these decisions, would also have to put into their sort of hierarchy of decision making. So we're saying you have to understand the cost of these systems, but you also have to put that in the context of all these, as you say, Laura, completely, you know, what regulatory support is needed. I think we probably have to wrap up there. It seems so rushed in these sessions, but we really wanted to get you into a room just poking around with some of the data. I really want to thank, could we go back to the slide, Lauren, please? I just want to thank again the fabulous teams from Citywise, from Sanergy, and from Emanti, and from the University of Leeds, who've just done an amazing job. I mean, sometimes I feel like we haven't achieved very much, but it's been a really big slog to get to this point and have even the data we do have and the system in place to collect more data. And that's a huge credit to these amazing teams. Just go to the next slide as well, Lauren. Oh, and the next one, sorry, I just have to jump to the next. As it happens, this session is sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and I would like to acknowledge that they've been a really strong driver of this sort of push to get some of this data much more clearly. But also, as it happens, Osprey Foundation are sponsoring this session, and Osprey have also been incredibly supportive and encouraging to us, recognising that this is the kind of information that will really help us to improve sanitation planning. So I just wanted to thank everybody for your contributions and all of the huge and great team behind all of this, and hope that you enjoy the rest of the programme. I'm figuring we've just ended on time. Thanks very much.